The drowned choir. The sea was grey and rolling, a long, slow breath drawn in by a cold god. The ferry cut through it like a forgotten knife, rust-streaked and half-rotten, shivering against each wave. Elias Morrow stood near the railing, coat buttoned tight, his notebook clutched to his chest like a talisman. Wind bit at his fingers. He didn't care. He had traveled for 2 days from Aberdeen, past Orkney, to reach this forgotten edge of the world. Skara. The name sounded like a cough. The captain, a grim man with a salt-scorched face and a look like he'd seen too much, had only spoken once since departure. 1 week, he had said without looking Elias in the eye. "I'll be back for you in 1 week. If you're still there." Still there. The phrase echoed louder than it should have. Elias wasn't afraid. He was fascinated. He'd read about Skara in a footnote buried in a late 18th century compilation of Scottish sea lore. A place where villagers once offered blood to the sea to ward off famine. A place whispered to be cursed. The last documented inhabitant left in 1926, except for a mysterious old woman who allegedly refused to leave. He'd found her name too, Mary MacLeod. The ferry thudded against a crumbling stone dock with a groan. The captain turned off the engine, coughed, then simply said, "If ye hear singing, plug your ears. Don't follow it. And whatever ye do, don't answer back." Before Elias could ask, the man was already reversing away from the pier. The island was smaller than he expected. Rocky, barren, cliffs rising like broken teeth. No birds called. The wind moaned through the stone ruins of a long-abandoned chapel. Only one house stood upright near the edge of a low hill, its roof patched with driftwood, a chimney exhaling a lazy column of smoke. He walked the narrow path to it, boots crunching sea grit. The door creaked open before he knocked. Mary MacLeod stood there. Ancient. Bent like a question mark. Her eyes were small and sharp, like needles behind the fog of cataracts. "You brought books," she said without greeting. "Yes," Elias replied, "I'm researching." "Don't tell me," she interrupted, stepping aside. "Come in. Hurry. Dusk is near." The inside of the cottage was cramped and warm, walls stacked with jars of preserved fish, hanging bundles of herbs, and what looked like bones, too long and too narrow to be from any land animal. She poured him black tea. "You'll stay here. 1 room. Don't go out after sunset." Elias, trying to stay polite, nodded. "Thank you. This place is remarkable. You've lived here alone all these years?" She laughed, a low rasp. "Alone? No, child. I've got them for company." She gestured to the sea. Elias followed her gaze. Fog was rolling in already, thick and white as milk. She whispered, almost inaudible, "Don't answer the singing." Elias's room was cramped, tucked beneath the eaves, with a low ceiling and a window that looked directly out onto the cliffs. The bed was stiff, the blanket itchy wool, but he was exhausted enough not to care. Mary had given him a strange, misshapen charm before retiring, a bundle of driftwood, tangled hair, and small white teeth. "For keeping them out," she said. "Who, exactly?" he asked, managing a nervous smile. She paused. "The ones who sing." Elias had heard plenty of folktales, selkies, kelpies, banshees, but Mary spoke with no hint of storytelling flair. Her voice held the flat conviction of someone who didn't believe, but remembered. That night, Elias awoke around 2 a.m. It wasn't noise that woke him. It was the absence of it. The wind, ever present since he arrived, had stopped. No creaks of the house, no waves against the cliff. Just a press of silence so thick it rang in his ears. Then, faint and pure, drifting through the window like smoke, came a voice. A woman's. Soft. Sad. Impossible. He sat up, breath caught in his throat. The melody rose like a tide, layered and dissonant, as though several voices sang in haunting harmony. The language was unlike anything he'd heard, vowel-heavy, serpentine. He scrambled to his notebook, fingers trembling as he tried to write down the phonetics. Then, his name. Clear. Spoken between the notes. Elias. He froze. The voice was behind the window. He turned slowly. A silhouette stood just beyond the glass. Feminine. Hair long and floating, as if underwater. Her face was pale and blurred by the fog, but the outline of her mouth moved in sync with the melody. Elias stumbled backward, his heart pounding so loudly it nearly drowned out her song. Then she smiled. Her teeth were too many. Too sharp. The moment shattered. He ripped the driftwood charm from under his pillow and held it aloft, though he wasn't sure why. Instinct, maybe. The figure vanished instantly, swallowed by the fog as if it had never been there. Elias sat on the floor, drenched in sweat, until morning light bled through the window. Mary didn't ask what happened. She only slid a mug of burnt tea toward him and muttered, "She knows your name now." "Who is she?" "One of the drowned. One of the first." Elias blinked. "You mean, a mermaid?" Mary looked him in the eye for the first time. "They were never mermaids, boy. That's the lie men told to forget the truth. They're what the sea made of the forgotten. And they don't forgive." The morning was colder than before, the air thick with the scent of seaweed and rot. Outside, the mist clung low to the earth like a living thing, curling around the rocks and half-buried driftwood. Elias left the cottage with a notebook under one arm and Mary's charm wrapped tightly around the other. He hadn't slept again, not really. He needed answers. He wandered the island's perimeter, sketching what few structures remained. A crumbling chapel stood like a broken jaw near the southern cliffs, half swallowed by brambles and rust-colored lichen. Inside, the stone altar was stained a permanent black. Symbols were etched into the rock, spirals, eyes, teeth. Not Christian. Not modern. Something older. He crouched beside the altar and traced a faint line in the stone. A phrase. Not English. Not Gaelic, either. The script burned into his mind even as he looked away. Back in the cottage, Mary was waiting for him with fish stew and a warning. "They're watching you now," she said. "They smell memory on your skin. They know when someone's trying to remember them back." "I don't believe in spirits," Elias replied. "They're not spirits. They're what the sea keeps when it's tired of giving back bodies. It changes them. Fills them with hunger." He rubbed his temple. "There has to be some logic. Maybe it's psychological. Mass hysteria, cultural trauma." "Boy." Mary leaned across the table. "When I was 6, my sister followed the song. I held her hand until she turned glass-eyed and smiling, then she walked into the tide and never came back. Maida built that charm you wear from her baby teeth. They tried to take me too. I've heard them whispering ever since." Elias said nothing. That night, the singing returned, but it was farther away, carried on the wind like distant bells. Still, Elias couldn't sleep. The window seemed to pulse with anticipation. He finally opened it and peered out. Down near the beach, 3 figures stood at the edge of the waves. Women. Tall. Hair dark as kelp. They didn't move, just stood as if waiting for something, or someone. He closed the window slowly, heart thundering. When he turned back, his notebook lay open on the bed. He hadn't left it there. And worse, the last page, once blank, now held handwriting he didn't recognize. "You wrote us into story. Now we'll write you into tide." Elias didn't remember falling asleep, but he awoke sometime past midnight, choking on salt water. His mouth and throat burned with brine. The bed sheets beneath him were damp, and the air reeked of the sea, wet, wild, and alive. He stumbled from the room, coughing, his chest tight as if something still clung to his ribs. The charm Mary had given him was gone. He turned the cottage upside down, searching. Nothing. Downstairs, the fireplace glowed with dying embers. Mary sat in her rocking chair, awake, her eyes locked on the door. "You heard them, didn't you?" she rasped. I dreamed of them. But it felt real. They were in the walls, in the air." He hesitated. "They said they want to write me into the tide." She didn't flinch. "They already have." She motioned toward the table. His notebook lay there, open to a new page. More writing he hadn't penned. A poem, or something close to it. The lines curved and slithered, mimicking waves, shifting between languages he barely recognized. Each verse ended the same way, "Come below, and sing." Elias sat, heart hammering. "Why me?" "Because you remember them. That's enough." Mary rose with difficulty and limped to a shelf. From behind a row of pickled eggs and dried crab shells, she pulled a bundle wrapped in sea-stained cloth. "This used to belong to my mother. When the last full moon before her death came, she walked barefoot to the cliffs and left it behind." Inside the bundle was a map, hand-drawn, brittle parchment. It showed the island. But not as it was now. There were symbols etched into the sea itself, a spiral-shaped formation off the coast, marked with jagged runes. A place labeled Coir Gael, Old Gaelic for, Choir of Love. Mary's fingers trembled as she traced it. It's not love they sing for. It's what they lost. The things taken from them by time, by men, by drowning. Elias looked from the map to her. "You've seen it. I've heard it." Her eyes turned glassy. "There's a cavern beneath the cliffs. Blacker than pitch. It sings with them. Every spring, the tide reveals the entrance for a single night. When?" She swallowed. "Tonight." Thunder cracked in the distance. Elias stood slowly. He didn't speak. Didn't pack. Just took the notebook and the map. Mary didn't try to stop him. At the door, she simply whispered, "You won't come back the same. If you come back at all." Elias gave a weak nod, stepped into the fog, and followed the call he could no longer pretend wasn't real. The fog thickened around Elias as he moved along the coastal path. His lantern flickered wildly in the wind, casting shadows that danced like broken-limbed creatures along the stone. Below, the tide thundered against the cliffs, louder than it had any right to be, like the sea was angry, or waiting. He reached the edge of the path where jagged rocks jutted out like crooked teeth. The map had shown a narrow cleft in the cliffside, one only revealed during the low spring tide. There it was. Barely a slit in the earth, hidden behind a wall of hanging kelp and dead barnacle husks. Elias squeezed through sideways, scraping his coat and knuckles. The smell hit him instantly, wet earth, salt, and the faintest trace of something rotten sweet, like spoiled honey. Inside, the air was warmer. Stifling. The cavern opened wider after a few steps, the walls slick with moss and worm-eaten limestone. His lantern illuminated carvings, primitive figures etched into the rock. Women with hair like waves, mouths wide open in eternal song. Men lay prone at their feet, drowning in lines that flowed downward into the earth like rivers of ink. Elias ran his fingers over the nearest carving. It was warm. He pressed deeper into the cave, the singing growing louder, not with his ears, but behind his eyes. A vibration in his bones, a music that stirred his blood like an ancestral memory. Then, he saw it. The cavern's heart. We are what remains when men forget the things they owed the sea. She descended the steps, one at a time, each footfall sending ripples through the cavern floor. You came with pen and paper, hoping to explain us. She stopped inches from his face. Elias smelled brine, blood, and something ancient. Something hungry. But you already know us. You dreamed us. Elias shook his head, dizzy. I read about you. I found a footnote, an old. No, her voice was colder now. You remembered us. We showed you long ago. You were a boy on a beach. Your brother went into the waves. You didn't follow. Elias's breath caught. The memory hit him like a wave. He was 7. Summer holiday. His older brother, laughing, running into the surf. A song. High, sweet, echoing from the rocks. Then, nothing. Only silence. And sea foam. No body ever found, the woman whispered. But we remember. Tears blurred Elias's vision. She leaned closer, lips brushing his ear. You escaped us once. But not this time. Then she held up his notebook, its pages now soaked, warped, filled with writing in the same alien script. His handwriting, overwritten. You've already begun the binding. Suddenly, the choir grew louder, harmonies rising like a tide. Elias screamed. The sea sang back. Elias woke gasping, his back arched in pain. He was lying on damp stone. The notebook was beside him, pages torn and scattered like autumn leaves. The hair rope binding his wrists had dissolved into black slime. The cave was empty. Or so he thought. The pool in the center remained, but it was no longer water. It was skin. Pale, pulsing, membranous. Like something unborn, dreaming beneath the surface. Faces pushed through, half-formed, flickering with pain and longing. Their mouths moved in silent screams. Some he recognized. His brother. A girl from a photo in Mary's house. A man from a long-forgotten newspaper article about a missing lighthouse keeper. Their eyes fixed on him, pleading. Accusing. He stumbled back. His breath caught. The song still throbbed in his head, but now there were words forming within it, words that sounded like his own voice speaking to him, not from him. You remember us. You feed us. That is the tithe. He clutched the notebook to his chest, desperate to anchor himself to something real. Pages fluttered open in the windless dark, revealing more new writing. The ink bled like wounds. Sketches, detailed, intricate, of the creatures he'd seen. Their anatomy. Their rituals. Symbols like the ones in the chapel. One showed a human figure bound to stone, throat open, mouth agape. Elias's face was drawn over it. He dropped the book and ran. Through the narrow corridor, past the bone carvings, through the moss-choked passage, he scrambled like a dying animal. The outside air hit him like a slap, cold and sharp, but he was free. Fog blanketed everything, but he knew the path now. Back at Mary's cottage, he banged on the door, screaming her name. She opened it slowly, saw his face, and wordlessly pulled him inside. She sat him down by the fire and offered whiskey. He downed it in one shuddering gulp. They showed you the pool, she said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. They showed me everything. Mary sighed. Then you're marked now. They'll come again. Not with claws. With memories. With dreams. They'll use your own mind to open the door. Elias's voice shook. I remembered my brother. I saw his face in the pool. He's theirs now, she whispered. But not gone. Not really. That's how they keep you close. They make you think there's still a way back. That's how they feed. Silence fell between them, broken only by the fire crackling and the moan of wind beyond the walls. Elias looked down at the notebook in his lap. The pages had stopped changing. For now. The storm came in the night. Wind slammed the cottage with fists of salt and rain. Mary nailed driftwood boards over the windows and murmured prayers in a language Elias didn't recognize. She scattered black salt at each corner of the room and tied eel bone charms to the doorframe. They walk in storms, she muttered. The real ones. Elias sat by the hearth, notebook on his knees, a pencil in hand. He hadn't meant to write. But the pencil moved, slow at first, then faster, guided not by thought, but by compulsion. He watched, paralyzed, as his own hand sketched a shoreline under a blood-red sky. A figure stood in the water, waist deep, arms open. It was him. In the drawing, a mermaid leaned against him, head resting on his shoulder. Her mouth was open, teeth like cracked shells, tongue long and black. She was whispering something into his ear. He turned the page. Another image, himself, older. Eyes blank. Kneeling before a coral throne. The choir surrounding him. Singing not to him, but through him. Mary saw the drawings and paled. They're hollowing you. What does that mean? They can't take you all at once. You're not ready. You still remember yourself. But they're peeling you like fruit. Memory by memory. Until only the part of you that belongs to them remains. Elias's throat tightened. So what do I do? Leave? Burn the book? She shook her head. They'll follow. You're marked. The book is just a door. The real key is in you. You need to seal it. How? She hesitated, then retrieved a small bundle wrapped in oiled leather from a chest beneath the floorboards. Inside, a knife. Bone handle. Blade shaped like a wave, carved from obsidian. My mother tried to sever her memory of them, she said quietly. It worked. For a time. But it also took everything else. Her name. Her family. Even me. Elias stared at the blade. And your sister? She walked willingly. They made her a song. A long silence passed. Then Elias rose. Took the knife. Stepped out into the storm. Wind howled like the choir itself. Rain struck his face in sheets, cold as ice. The path to the cliffs glowed faintly, blue veins in the soil pulsing with life. He knew where to go. He didn't know why, but his feet did. Somewhere beneath the wind, the mermaids were singing again. Not to lure him. To welcome him back. The cliffs groaned beneath Elias's boots, sodden with rain and sea foam. The storm raged like a living thing, tearing at the earth, howling in a dozen voices. Lightning cracked overhead, each flash revealing more of the coastline than he remembered. Stone pillars jutted from the surf like the ribs of some dead leviathan. The path before him shimmered, not from water, but movement beneath the ground. The knife pulsed warm in his hand. The entrance to the cave was wider now. The sea had torn away the kelp veil, revealing a mouth in the earth, black, yawning, and wet. He stepped inside. This time, there was no resistance. No need to squeeze through. The cave welcomed him. The spiral path led deeper, lower than before. Moss glowed faintly green on the walls, pulsing like heartbeat rhythm. Whispers floated around him, distinct and familiar. Elias. Brother. Come home. The song had no melody now. Only longing. He reached the amphitheater again, but it was changed. The bone choir was larger. Dozens of them stood in concentric circles, all still, all silent, eyes fixed on him. Each figure wore the shape of someone Elias had known, old teachers, neighbors, even the face of a long-dead grandfather, overlaid with shimmering, scaled bodies and needle-sharp limbs. They watched, not as predators, but as witnesses. The central pool had reformed. No longer a surface of flesh. It was water again, but impossibly deep, and utterly still. At its center stood the pale woman, arms open. You returned, she said, this time with lips that moved. I didn't have a choice. There is always a choice, she whispered. But you remembered us. That is what binds. Elias held up the obsidian knife. I came to end this. Laughter rippled through the chamber, low and bitter. The others joined in, one after the other, until the whole choir echoed with it. And, she asked. You cannot kill a memory. Not one written in blood and tide. I'll sever what ties me to you. You'd sever yourself, she said, stepping closer, no longer smiling. Do you know what will be left? Elias's fingers tightened on the blade. I don't care. The leader hissed, and the entire choir sang. Not words. A scream. It poured into him. Through his eyes, his ears, his bones. His brother's face rose again in his mind, laughing, just before the waves took him. The cold. The helplessness. The silence. And then, he saw what had really happened. His brother hadn't drowned. He had followed something. He had smiled before he vanished beneath the tide. The scream cut off. Elias fell to his knees, blade clattering beside him. Now, the woman said gently, you understand. Elias knelt in the wet stone chamber, the obsidian knife glinting at his side. The echoes of the choir's scream still rang behind his ribs, vibrating in places no sound should touch. The pale woman knelt beside him. Her fingers, too long, too jointed, rested gently on his shoulder. Do you see now? The forgetting was the sin. The remembering, the price. He turned his head, tears cutting clean lines through the salt on his cheeks. I was just a boy. You were ours, she said, and the voices of 100 drowned joined hers. Elias tried to breathe, but the air felt thick, like water pushing into his lungs. You think the sea just takes, she whispered. But it also stores. Every name. Every scream. Every soul denied mourning. She stood again and extended a hand. Not in menace, but invitation. You remembered your brother. Now remember yourself. The water in the pool began to ripple, rising, spilling over the edge without making a sound. It formed shapes. Images. His childhood. His brother leading him down the shore at dusk. That voice in the waves. The promise of a song that only children could hear clearly. His brother had been chosen. And Elias had run. You were always meant to follow, the woman said. But you turned away. Buried it. And that forgetting called us back. Elias stared into the rising water. It wasn't a pool anymore, it was a mirror. He saw himself, older. Hunched. Empty. Living alone, a man who wrote ghost stories and never smiled, always glancing toward the shore. The woman circled behind him. Her voice now soft as sea foam, you sought stories to fill the hollow. But it was never ink you needed. It was truth. He stood, knees shaking. You want me to join you? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The choir stepped forward, a slow, synchronous movement, surrounding him. One placed a cold hand on his chest. Another reached for his temple. A third gently took the obsidian knife and held it up like an offering to the pool. Elias stared at his reflection again. Then he did the only thing he could think to do. He stepped forward. And dove into the water. Not as sacrifice. As seeker. The water closed around him like a memory long denied. The water wasn't cold. It was alive. It wrapped around Elias like a second skin, holding him, not drowning him, but cradling. Guiding. Pulling him down. He opened his eyes. The water wasn't dark. It glowed, pulsed with bioluminescent veins, green, violet, blue. He drifted through a vast cathedral of kelp and bone, coral archways stitched with sea silk, schools of fish darting like spilled ink. There were bodies below. Not dead. Suspended. Some were human. Some were becoming something else. Their eyes flicked toward him as he passed. None blinked. He felt no pressure, no burning in his lungs. The water had become breath. Time loosened. Thought slowed. At the base of the undersea cathedral stood a door, half coral, half ribcage. It opened without touch, its hinges groaning like an old ship. Inside, a chamber of silence. And in its center, his brother. Unchanged. Standing. Waiting. His hair floated in the water like sea grass, his face calm, peaceful. "Elias," he said, lips not moving, voice entering directly into Elias's mind. "I thought you'd never come." Elias swam closer. "What is this place?" "Between memory and tide," his brother said. "This is where the songs are written. You're alive." "I'm held," he said gently. "Not dead. Not entirely me anymore. But not gone." Elias's chest tightened. "Why?" His brother looked at the ceiling, where shadows of mermaids swam above like cathedral angels. "They offered me something. A song that never ends. A place without pain. I accepted. I was young." Elias swallowed. "You could have fought." "No," his brother said. "You don't fight the sea. You surrender, or you sing." The choir's voice returned, distant but present. A rising hum. Elias shook his head. "I'm not like you. I didn't go." His brother smiled. "But you came back. That's what they wanted." "Why me?" "Because you remember. That makes you powerful here. Memory is music." A sudden tremor rippled through the chamber. The water darkened. The mermaids above circled faster, agitated. "They're coming," his brother said, gaze sharpening. "Not to claim you, to use you. They want to rewrite the world. And they need a voice." Elias turned to the doorway, heart racing. He understood now. The songs weren't just memories. They were spells. The chamber shook again, sending waves through the liquid silence. The walls of coral cracked in places, releasing tendrils of ink-black water that writhed like smoke. "They know you understand now," Elias's brother said, backing toward the altar of barnacle stone behind him. "That makes you dangerous. To them. To everything." Above, the circling mermaids descended, no longer angelic silhouettes but nightmare shapes, their beauty shattered into too many eyes, split jaws, and bones showing through translucent flesh. The song that followed was no longer haunting. It was instructional. A language of command. Elias felt it pushing into him. Not just into his mind, but into his bones. A rewriting. He clutched his skull. Fragments of memory shattered and reformed. The beach. The night his brother vanished. He hadn't just stood there watching. He had heard the song. He had sung it back. He had joined the chorus, just one line, one note, and that was the tide. That was the agreement. They had spared him not out of mercy, but because he was already theirs. "You helped them open the first door," his brother said quietly. "A child's voice carries farther than you think." "No," Elias whispered. "I forgot. I didn't know what I was doing. But you remember now. And that gives you a choice." The mermaids pressed close around the chamber, their forms flickering between faces Elias knew and the monstrous beneath. They extended hands. Clawed. Webbed. Some gentle. Some commanding. "You can stay," his brother said. "Be with me. Sing for them. Or you write the song down. Speak it aloud. Let it go into the world above. Let them in." Elias's stomach turned. "That's why they lured me. That's why they wanted a storyteller. His brother's face was unreadable. Memory is the root of all myth. Myth becomes belief. And belief is a key. Elias looked down at his hands. Ink stained his palms. The notebook, still pressed to his chest, was dry. But full. He hadn't written the song. He had transcribed it. And now it was ready. The mermaids sang louder. The sea around him trembled. The door between worlds was open, but only he could choose which way it turned. Elias gripped the notebook. It pulsed against his chest like a second heart. All around him, the mermaids floated in reverent silence, their monstrous forms half hidden by strands of seaweed and shadow. Their eyes, black, reflective, bottomless, were trained on him. Waiting. Not for him to run. Not to scream. But to speak. His brother stepped forward, hands outstretched. If you say the words, if you read them, you won't need to return to the surface. They'll come to you. Through every shore. I don't want them to come, Elias rasped. His brother's smile flickered. Then why did you write? Elias opened the notebook. The script was impossible, glyphs made of teeth, hooks, waves. They moved on the page like organisms. Yet somehow, they made sense. He understood every symbol. He knew how they'd sound in his mouth, how they'd taste in his throat. And he knew, once spoken, the song would not be stopped. It would ripple outward. It would change everything. Cities would drown without water. People would dream in tongues not their own. The sea would remember every cruelty ever cast into it, and sing them back into the air. The mermaids swam closer. You are the voice, they said as one. You are the breach. Elias took a step back. I can't. You already did, his brother said. When you came back. When you let memory take root again. He turned toward the coral doorway. The tide beyond it shimmered. I still have the knife, Elias whispered. The mermaids hissed. His brother's eyes darkened. You would sever this? Us? You'd lose me again. If I let them through, Elias said slowly, I lose everything else. One of the mermaids darted forward, faster than thought, and bit into his shoulder. He screamed. The water turned black around him, blooming red. You don't leave once you know the melody, the pale woman snarled, rising from below. You become it. Elias ripped the notebook from his chest, flipping to the final page. There, scribbled in human ink, his ink, was a line not in their language. A story forgotten is a song undone. It wasn't the glyphs. It was his. He had written a countersong. His hands shook. Blood drifted around him like petals. He began to speak. The first word slipped from Elias's lips like a broken shell. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't meant to be. It was jagged. Human. Crooked with doubt. But it was his. The mermaids shrieked. Not in fear, but rage. Their song broke tempo. Discord echoed through the chamber, turning harmony into screeching chaos. The glyphs in the notebook pulsed violently, leaking ink that swirled like smoke in the water. Elias pressed on. Each word pulled more from him than the last, chunks of memory, moments of childhood, his first kiss, his mother's laugh. The sound of dry leaves under autumn boots. All of it burned to fuel the countersong. But as each word left his lips, it replaced something else. Not forgetting. Reclaiming. He remembered the first time he feared the sea, not as myth, but as truth. A scream behind a crashing wave. A hand reaching up from the tide and dragging a boy under. Not his brother. Him. The mermaids had taken him once already. But he had come back. I am not your instrument, Elias shouted, the words now boiling the water. I am your echo, unwritten. The pale woman howled and lunged. Her teeth stretched beyond the limits of bone, her hair a storm cloud of kelp and decay. But the water split between them. The countersong formed a sphere, no, a wound, in the ocean's body. A breach that refused to sing in their key. His brother cried out from behind the altar, voice cracking, "Elias, don't. You'll lose what little of me is left." Elias looked up, tears streaming, mingling with his blood. "I'd rather lose you than lose everything else." With a final breath, he screamed the last line. The notebook burst into light, paper unraveling into flame that burned underwater. The glyphs shriveled. The ink evaporated. And the sea screamed. Not the mermaids. The sea itself. It roared as though it were alive and bleeding. The choir shattered. Some dissolving into fishbone, others retreating into cracks in the coral like vermin. The pale woman's form twisted and imploded, torn back into foam. Elias drifted in the aftermath, weightless, his vision flickering. The song was undone. The memory sealed. But so was the door. And on the other side. He was still inside. The water was still. No current, no movement. No sound. Just Elias, drifting in a cathedral of silence and lightless weight. He tried to breathe, and found he still could. But it was like pulling breath through memory, not lungs. The countersong had not just silenced the mermaids. It had wounded the sea itself. Far above, the glow of the coral chamber faded, layer by layer. The ribbed archways collapsed in slow motion. Dust drifted like ash. The kelp veil wept itself into decay. And beneath it all, Elias floated. Alone. "You closed the door," a voice said. Not his brother's. Not the choir's. It was his own. He turned, and saw himself. Another Elias. Standing upright on the seafloor, eyes wide open, flesh covered in barnacles and scars shaped like runes. The echo smiled. "You undid their song," the echo said. "But you're still here." Elias looked down at his hands. The ink was gone. The knife, gone. The notebook, ashes in the current. He wasn't bleeding anymore. He wasn't changing. He simply was. "I killed it," he whispered. "I stopped them." "You paused them," the echo said. "But the sea never forgets, Elias. The sea stores. It waits. And it always reclaims what was born beneath it." Elias wanted to scream. Wanted to swim, to kick toward the light, to wake up. But there was no up. There was no waking. Because he remembered now. He had sung the song once. And once was enough. The mermaids were gone. For now. But their song still existed, in fragments, in deep trenches, in lost dreams of those who listened too closely to the tide. The sea wasn't a place. It was a mind. And Elias? He was a thought caught in it. Preserved like salt-crusted myth. The silence pressed in again. But it wasn't lonely. Somewhere deep in the black, another voice hummed. Familiar. Old. His brother. A harmony, distant, but there. Elias closed his eyes. And sang one last note, not for power, not for summoning, but for memory. For remembrance. And for a moment. The sea wept. The sea was calm. Waves lapped gently against the rocks of Narrow Hook, the little cliffside town with too many boarded windows and a lighthouse that hadn't worked in decades. No one remembered why they feared the beach after dark. They just did. But that morning, as a silver mist curled across the sand, something washed ashore. A notebook. Sodden, but intact. Its pages filled with strange black marks, some bleeding into one another, some seemingly burned in. But here and there, written in plain ink, were lines of human thought. Memories. Descriptions. A child's voice. A scream. A song that shouldn't have been remembered. It was found by a girl named Lena, age 11, who liked to look for sea glass and half-buried bones. She brought it home. Showed it to her mother, who glanced at the symbols and frowned like she'd almost heard a whisper. She tucked it away in a drawer. But that night, Lena dreamed of voices. Not frightening. Not yet. Just familiar. They sang to her from beneath her bedroom floor, from behind her closet door, from the drain in the kitchen sink. Tell our story. She woke with salt crusted in the corners of her eyes and sand beneath her nails. The next morning, she opened the notebook again. And began to copy it. Not because she understood. But because it felt like it had to be preserved. In another town, miles away, a man named Declan Morris, editor of a small horror journal, opened a package with no return address. Inside, a manuscript. The Drowned Choir. He flipped through it, brow furrowed. Some of it read like memoir. Some like folklore. And some of it felt alive. He held it in shaking hands. Something in the ink moved when the light hit it just right. He didn't remember requesting the story. But he printed it. Released it into the world. Just another entry in an obscure horror zine no one really reads. Or so he thought. Until the letters started arriving. I dreamed the song after reading it. I found water in my lungs this morning. The voices are so beautiful. Should I follow them? The sea was quiet. But the story was out. The issue of the horror journal arrived in the mailboxes of just under 200 subscribers. Most flipped through it absent-mindedly, used to tales of haunted radios, cryptid sightings, the occasional half-decent ghost poem. But those who read the Drowned Choir reported something strange. The text flickered. Not on screens, but on the page itself. Words twisted when read aloud. Ink thickened, bled into margins. Some pages, when left under a lamp too long, steamed faintly. A few readers swore they could hear something behind them when they got to part 9. Whispers like bubbles bursting. Like coral humming behind a locked door. One woman, Jessa Camber, 42, nurse, widowed, threw the magazine in the trash after dreaming of her daughter's voice singing from the bottom of the bathtub. But the next night, she found the journal back on her nightstand, open to the chapter where Elias first hears the mermaid's lullaby. In Florida, a graduate student published a blog review of the story, calling it hypnotic, visceral horror. The post went viral. She was found a week later, drowned in a lake. No water in her lungs. But her vocal cords were missing. And across the internet, a dozen amateur narrators uploaded readings of the tale, adding ambient ocean sounds, soft whispers layered beneath the words. Most of them vanished within days. Those who stayed grew distant. Silent. One, a teenage boy in Edinburgh, updated his channel with a single, eerie message. I didn't make up the song. It made me. They're in the vowels. Every syllable is a hook. I see the tide even when I close my eyes. Then he uploaded a 7-hour loop of his own breathing and soft humming. It gained millions of views overnight. Listeners described dreaming of the sea. Of someone waiting there. Of faces beneath the waves mouthing along with the song. The old fears had returned. But no one remembered where they came from. Only that the ocean now felt like it was listening. And one by one, those who heard the choir began humming along. The ocean was no longer content to whisper through waves. It had found new channels. Through frequencies. Through stories. Through us. In a sound lab at a coastal university, an audio engineer named Mika Ren tried to isolate the frequency embedded in the viral humming video. She slowed it. Filtered it. Played it through water tanks and underwater microphones. It wasn't just sound. It was structure. A lattice of vibrations that moved not just air, but thought. At 3:14 a.m., she sent her final message to a colleague. It's rewriting the way neurons fire. I think it's a language meant for inside the body. Not the ears. She was found floating in her lab tank the next morning. There was no sign of struggle. But her body was covered in barnacle-like scars, arranged in spiral patterns across her skin. Her eardrums had been replaced with delicate membranes, like gills. And on her lips was a smile that stretched too wide. Meanwhile, a podcaster named Caleb Hart, known for his deep dives into cursed media, recorded an episode on the drowned choir. He read excerpts from the story, mocking its slow build and supposed supernatural hype. But during the edit, something odd occurred. Segments of audio he didn't record inserted themselves. Humming. Soft singing. Then his own voice, warbling, not reading, but chanting. He tried to delete it. Over and over. Each time he reopened the file, the mysterious segments grew longer. He uploaded the episode anyway. Whether by choice or compulsion, no one could say. His audience exploded. Thousands of comments poured in. I listened with headphones and felt my feet sink into sand. Why did the tide come into my apartment? She was under my bed, mouthing the words. I let her in. Caleb was last seen walking into the ocean at low tide. He carried a microphone with him. Still broadcasting. Now, somewhere in a small town library, a girl named Lena, older now, quiet, eyes glassy, sits cross-legged in the reading room. She hums to herself. Beside her is the same notebook, the ink still wet. Children gather near, as if drawn by instinct. Some of them start to hum with her. The drowned choir doesn't need waves to carry it anymore. It has voices. It has us. It started with water where it shouldn't be. In subway tunnels. In sealed hospital wards. In coffins. Droplets gathering like condensation on the wrong side of reality. Humidity rose in cities far from any coast. Metal rusted overnight. Mold spread in spiral patterns across windows and ceilings. People began to hum in their sleep. At first it was mistaken for mass hysteria. Sleepwalking incidents. Night terrors. But then the eyes changed. Doctors couldn't explain it, how the vitreous humor of certain patients turned slightly iridescent. Almost pearlescent, like abalone shells. Or fish scales. A baby in Iceland was born already humming. No mouth movement, just a vibration felt in her bones. An entire school choir in Maine fell silent mid-performance, then resumed in perfect unison, singing a song no one had taught them. They couldn't remember afterward. But the crowd wept. They said it reminded them of something they'd never heard. Like coming home to a place that never existed. Deep beneath the Mariana Trench, hydrophones picked up sounds no one could explain. Not whale song. Not seismic. It was structured. Layered. One linguist, after analyzing the patterns, wrote in his notebook. They aren't singing to us. They're singing for us. Preparing the breath in our lungs. We are their final instrument. He vanished 2 nights later. Only the notebook remained. It was wet. And then came the broadcast. No one knew the origin. It cut across stations, AM, FM, digital streams. It silenced podcasts, hijacked music apps, replaced hold music on corporate phones. A woman's voice, distorted, singing in a language no one could quite understand, but everyone felt. Across the world, those who had read the drowned choir stood up. Some wept. Some opened their mouths and sang back. Others began to walk, toward the nearest body of water. Any water. Bathtubs. Pools. Oceans. The sea had never needed ships. It needed mouths. Lena, now 15, stood alone on Narrow Hook's cliffs. She held the notebook in one hand. And with the other, she conducted. Not the ocean. But the air. And the people below. Who gathered without invitation, sang the drowned song back to the sky. Their eyes glowed faint blue. Their breath misted even in summer heat. The tide came in, not to drown. But to listen. The sky turned gray, not with clouds, but with echo. Above the gathered crowd at Narrow Hook, sound hung like mist, layered, heavy, impossible to breathe without hearing. Lena stood on the edge of the cliff, her arms raised like the limbs of a tide-stripped tree. The notebook had become something else. No longer paper and ink, but a mouth of its own. Pages fluttered in windless air, each one glowing faint blue, edges rimmed with salt. Symbols floated free of the paper, drifting like spores into the throats of those below. One by one, they began to change. Gills blooming beneath jawlines. Fingers webbing. Voices deepening into ancient harmony. Not grotesque. Not monstrous. Inevitable. As if their flesh had always waited for this music. And the sea responded. From every ocean, from every sunken trench and drowned city, they came. The mermaids. The sirens. The drowned ones. Not beautiful. Not human. Not entirely real. But vast. Elegant in their terror. Like creatures grown from coral dreams and whale bones, with mouths that opened like split conch shells, lined with rows of teeth tuned to harmony. They did not swim to the shore. They rose. Lifted by the tide like a choir ascending. Above them, the air rippled, and something began to speak. Not with words, but meaning. A voice too large for ears. A name, spoken not in syllables, but in memory. Every person felt it differently. A grandmother saw the moment she almost drowned at age 4, and wept. A soldier remembered the sound of a comrade's last breath, drowned in mud, and sang. A lonely man, who had never known love, heard it in full. The sea had a name. And its name was everything you ever forgot. The choir reached its final note. A silence followed, not absence, but fulfillment. And the sea listened. Then, slowly, the voices faded. The tide withdrew. The ocean calmed. The people of Narrow Hook blinked, as if waking from a dream. No one spoke. Lena was gone. The notebook, gone. The song, left behind. But in every wind-licked cove. Every forgotten harbor. Every child humming to themselves with no idea why. The drowned choir waits. Not in malice. But in memory. And sometimes, when the moon is right and the shore breathes heavy, you'll hear it again. And you'll understand. You were always part of the song.